Portsmouth, England. 11 March 1942. The workshop smells of machine oil and cordite. A dozen men in overalls crowd around a workbench where something utterly unremarkable sits beneath a shroud. Wing Commander Charles Goodeve pulls back the cloth to reveal what looks like an oversized soup tin with a tail, 8 inches across, roughly 2 feet long, painted dull gray. One of the assembled engineers picks it up, testing its weight, about 4.5 pounds. This, Goodeve says, his voice carrying that particular British understatement that masks revolutionary thinking, is going to sail into Brest Harbour and blow a hole in the side of a destroyer, whilst the crew sleep in their bunks. The men exchange glances. They've heard grand claims before. The war has produced no shortage of elaborate schemes that looked brilliant on paper and catastrophic in practice. But Goodeve isn't finished. He holds up a second object, identical to the first. And this one, he continues, will follow 30 seconds later, then another, then another. The Germans won't see them coming, they won't hear them, and by the time they realize what's happening, their ships will already be sinking. The thing on the bench doesn't look like much. It certainly doesn't look like the weapon that would force the Kriegsmarine to evacuate entire anchorages, station guards at 5-meter intervals along harbor walls, and lose sleep over the possibility that their most powerful vessels might simply explode whilst tied to a dock. But that's precisely what it would become. This is the story of the Limpet mine, a weapon so simple in concept, so devastating in application, that it fundamentally changed how naval powers thought about harbor defense. More than that, it's the story of how British ingenuity turned a magnetic disc and a few pounds of explosive into a psychological weapon that made enemy sailors afraid of their own moorings. By early 1942, Britain faced a naval challenge that conventional weapons simply couldn't address. German warships, destroyers, torpedo boats, merchant raiders were spending increasing amounts of time in occupied French ports. Brest, Saint-Nazaire, Bordeaux. These weren't isolated anchorages where a surface raid might slip in and out. These were heavily defended harbours, bristling with anti-aircraft batteries, searchlights, patrol boats, and thousands of German troops. The RAF could bomb them, certainly, but heavy vessels could withstand near misses, and direct hits on ships at anchor required extraordinary luck in the expenditure of tons of high explosive. The mathematics were brutal. A Lancaster bomber carried roughly 6,350 kilograms of bombs. The chances of scoring a direct hit on a specific vessel from 3,000 meters altitude at night, with German flak filling the sky, were perhaps 1 in 50. Factor in the loss rate. Bomber Command was hemorrhaging aircraft at a rate that made every mission a calculated sacrifice, and the equation became untenable. Britain was spending aircraft, crews, and ordnance at a catastrophic rate for minimal guaranteed damage. What the Admiralty needed was a weapon that could be delivered silently, placed with precision against a ship's hull below the waterline, and detonated with enough force to rupture steel plating and flood compartments. It needed to be small enough for a single man to carry, reliable enough to function after hours in cold sea water, and simple enough that Commandos could deploy it in darkness whilst enemy sentries paced the dock above. Existing naval mines were far too large. Depth charges required ships or aircraft to deliver them. Torpedoes needed firing platforms. None of these solved the fundamental problem: how do you sink a ship that's sitting safely in harbor, surrounded by defenses, without announcing your presence until it's too late? The Germans weren't idle either. Their harbor defenses were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Listening posts, underwater nets, patrol schedules designed to eliminate predictable gaps. Any weapon attempting to breach these defenses couldn't rely on force. It would have to rely on stealth, on being so quiet and so inconspicuous that it could be positioned against a ship's hull whilst guards stood meters away, utterly unaware that in a few hours their vessel would be torn open from the inside. This was the challenge facing the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a deliberately obscure name for the organization tasked with creating the tools that conventional military thinking couldn't conceive. The answer emerged from the workshops at HMS Welwyn, a requisitioned country house in Hertfordshire that served as the nerve centre for Britain's most unorthodox weapons development. The team, led by Stuart McCrae, and drawing on expertise from across military and civilian engineering, started with a deceptively simple question: what's the minimum amount of explosive needed to sink a ship if you can place it exactly where you want it? The answer was roughly 2 kilograms of plastic explosive shaped into a precise charge. Not scattered across a wide area like a bomb blast, but focused into a jet of superheated gas that would punch through steel plating like a spike through cardboard. The Monroe effect, discovered decades earlier, demonstrated that a shaped charge with a conical cavity could concentrate explosive force into a penetrating beam capable of defeating armor far thicker than the explosive itself. A 2-kilogram charge, properly shaped, could penetrate 25 millimeters of ship plate and create a hole the size of a dinner plate below the waterline. But the explosive was only half the problem. The mine needed to attach itself to a ship's hull and stay there whilst timers ticked down, waves pushed and pulled, and the metal surface potentially carried barnacles, rust, or anti-fouling paint. The solution came from an unlikely source: horseshoe magnets. 6 powerful magnets, each roughly 8 centimeters long, were mounted around the rim of the mine's casing. Combined, they generated enough magnetic attraction to hold approximately 20 kilograms against a steel surface, more than 4 times the mine's actual weight. A commando could place it against a hull, and it would grip like a limpet to a rock, hence the name that stuck. The timing mechanism was equally elegant, a chemical fuse using an ampule of acetone that slowly dissolved a celluloid disc. As the disc thinned, it eventually allowed a spring-loaded striker to hit a percussion cap. By varying the thickness of the celluloid disc, timers could be set from 30 minutes to 6 hours. Crucially, there was no ticking, no mechanical movement that might be detected by a listening device. Just chemistry, patient and silent. The final design measured 21 centimeters in diameter and 11 centimeters deep. Total weight, approximately 2 kilograms, including the explosive. The casing was fabricated from mild steel, painted in drab gray or occasionally black for night operations. Production took place at several facilities across England, with final assembly often conducted at forward bases, depending on operational requirements. Exact production numbers remain classified even now, but estimates suggest tens of thousands were manufactured between 1942 and 1945, with variants adapted for different targets and conditions. What made the Limpet mine truly revolutionary wasn't just its technical specifications. It was the operational philosophy it embodied. This wasn't a weapon designed to be deployed en masse. It was a precision instrument that required skilled operators, careful planning, and extraordinary courage. Each mine had to be carried underwater by a diver or commando, positioned by hand against an enemy hull, armed, and then the operator had to escape before detonation. The weapon demanded everything from its users. In return, it offered the possibility of sinking a warship with less explosive than a single 500-pound bomb. The first major deployment came during Operation Frankton in December 1942. 10 Royal Marines in 5 canoes, collapsible kayaks really, paddled nearly 100 kilometers up the Gironde estuary towards Bordeaux harbour. They carried 36 limpet mines between them. The operation has been documented extensively, though the specific details of mine placement remain partially classified. What's known is this. On the night of the 11th of December, the surviving crews, only 4 men reached the target area, attached their mines to German cargo vessels in the harbour. The accounts from German records describe explosions beginning around 700 hours the following morning. The cargo ship Dresden suffered severe damage. The Portland was holed below the waterline. Speerbrecher 5, a minesweeper, required extensive repairs. The psychological impact rippled far beyond the physical damage. The Germans were forced to confront a disturbing reality. Their harbour defences, designed to stop ships and submarines, were useless against men in small boats carrying attachable explosives. In the Mediterranean, limpet mines saw extensive use against Italian shipping. Allied divers, operating from submarines or small surface craft, placed mines against hulls in Naples, Palermo, and other occupied ports. The weapon's effectiveness wasn't just measured in tonnage sunk. It forced the Axis powers to completely rethink harbour security. Guards were doubled. Underwater nets were installed at enormous expense. Searchlights swept harbours all night. Ships were moved to different berths unpredictably. All of this consumed resources, tied down personnel, and created an atmosphere of perpetual anxiety. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Records from these operations are frustratingly sparse in places. Many missions were conducted by special operations teams whose activities remain classified. What's documented tends to focus on the spectacular successes. The ships sunk, the harbours thrown into chaos. What's harder to quantify is the cumulative effect of dozens of smaller operations. Damaged vessels requiring repairs, crews refusing to sleep aboard their ships in harbour, port facilities disrupted by security protocols. The Limpet mine worked as much through fear as through explosive force. The Germans developed their own versions of magnetic adhesive charges, but they arrived later and never achieved the same operational success. The Haftordung, a magnetic anti-tank mine adapted for naval use, was larger and more cumbersome, weighing nearly 4 kilograms compared to the British 2-kilogram design. More significantly, German mine warfare doctrine focused on defensive operations, mining approaches to harbours, rather than attacking ships at anchor. They never developed the same raiding culture that British and later Allied special forces embraced. The Americans, characteristically, took the British design and attempted to improve it. The result was the Mark 24 Limpet mine, which used a clock mechanism instead of chemical timers. More precise, certainly, but also heavier at nearly 3 kilograms and prone to mechanical failure in cold water. The British chemical fuse, whilst less precise, was more reliable and utterly silent. In operations where detection meant death, silence mattered more than precision. The Italians, ironically, pioneered many of the techniques that Limpet mines exploited. Their manned torpedoes and combat swimmers had devastated British shipping in the Mediterranean earlier in the war. But Italian charges tended to be larger and required more elaborate delivery systems. The British Limpet represented a democratization of the concept, simple enough that any trained commando could deploy it, small enough that multiple mines could be carried in a single operation. What set the British weapon apart wasn't superior technology. The shaped charge principle was well understood. Magnetic attachment was straightforward engineering. The chemical timer was adapted from existing demolition devices. The genius lay in the integration, creating a package that balanced explosive power, reliability, ease of use, and operational stealth better than any equivalent design. Post-war analysis by both American and Soviet naval experts consistently cited the British Limpet mine as the benchmark for harbour sabotage weapons, a design so well executed that attempts to improve it generally made it worse. Assessing the Limpet mine's true impact requires separating documented destruction from psychological effect. In pure tonnage terms, Limpet mines probably accounted for fewer than 50,000 tons of enemy shipping sunk or damaged, a fraction of what submarines or aircraft destroyed. But tonnage figures missed the point entirely. The weapon's real impact was forcing the Axis powers to defend places they thought were safe. Every harbour became a potential target. Every moored vessel became vulnerable. The Germans couldn't protect everything, but they had to act as if they could. Resources that might have been deployed to the front lines instead stood guard over harbours. Naval crews, already stretched thin, had to maintain constant vigilance even in port. The cost wasn't just material, it was psychological. Contemporary German naval records captured after the war reveal the extent of this anxiety. Orders were issued prohibiting crews from sleeping aboard ship in certain harbours. Watches were tripled. Underwater inspection protocols were implemented that required divers to examine hulls daily. Some of these measures were reasonable responses to a genuine threat. Others bordered on paranoia. But that was precisely the point. The Limpet mine made German naval commanders look at their own moorings and wonder what might be lurking beneath the waterline. The technology itself influenced post-war naval mine development significantly. Modern Limpet mines still use shaped charges and magnetic attachment. Chemical timers have been replaced by electronic ones, but the basic operational concept remains unchanged. Special forces around the world train in Limpet mine deployment because the tactical niche it fills, silent, precise sabotage of high-value targets in defended harbours, hasn't disappeared. Surviving examples can be seen at the Imperial War Museum in London and the Royal Marines Museum in Portsmouth. They sit in glass cases looking remarkably innocuous, these grey cylinders that once made German admirals fear their own harbours. The mines don't look particularly dangerous. That was always part of their effectiveness. Portsmouth, England. The workshop where Wing Commander Goodeve first unveiled his oversized soup tin is long gone. The men who crowded around that workbench are mostly gone too, but the principle they refined, that ingenuity and precision can achieve what brute force cannot, remains embedded in military thinking. The Limpet mine sank ships, certainly. It disrupted harbours, damaged infrastructure, and forced operational changes that cascaded through German naval planning. But its greatest achievement was psychological. It took the enemy's sense of security and shattered it as thoroughly as shaped charges shattered steel plating. It made defended harbours feel vulnerable. It turned anchorages into anxiety zones. It proved that no amount of guns and guards could stop a handful of men carrying 2 kilograms of explosive and enough courage to place it against a hull while sentries walked overhead. This wasn't the weapon that won the war. No single weapon does that. But it was the weapon that made the enemy afraid to sleep in harbour, that forced defensive measures consuming resources and personnel, that demonstrated how a well-designed tool in skilled hands could achieve strategic effects wildly disproportionate to its size. 8 inches across, 2 feet long, 4.5 pounds. It doesn't sound like much. But that grey cylinder represented something the Germans couldn't defend against, the willingness to sail into defended harbours and attach explosives by hand to ships the enemy thought were safe. That willingness, married to elegant engineering, made destroyers explode in their own harbours. And it made certain that the Kriegsmarine never felt truly secure again, even when surrounded by their own guns. If you liked my video, please share your opinion in the comments box and subscribe to the channel. Also, turn on the bell icon so that the latest videos like this keep reaching you. See you in the next video. Take care and goodbye.